Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey into the surprisingly brutal heart of the past, a place where the phrase high body count wasn't just a grim statistic, but an everyday reality. You're trudging through the mud of a muddy, forgotten field, the air heavy with the promise of rain, but something else, too, a sense of finality. A raven watches you from a crooked tree branch, its glossy black eyes seeming to tally the fallen. We're going to dive into the craziest body counts in medieval history, the numbers that sound more like modern warfare than swords and shields. It's a bit of a reality check. A reminder that the past was a lot messier than the glossy images you see in movies. You probably won't survive this journey with your illusions intact, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're just tuning in, let me know where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a small hill, the wind whistling past your ears, carrying the faint, metallic scent of something long gone. The ground beneath your feet feels strangely soft, a mix of soil and something else you'd rather not think about. You look out over a landscape that, in your mind, is a serene, rolling green, but in history was anything but. The first rule of counting bodies in the medieval world is that no one was really keeping a precise tally. It's not like they had statisticians with clipboards. This is our first major obstacle. The numbers you hear are almost always estimates, often wildly exaggerated by chroniclers looking to make their side sound more impressive, or their enemies more monstrous. It's the ultimate game of historical telephone, a quirky tidbit. One of the earliest known attempts at a census, the Domesday Book in 1086, was less about counting people and more about inventorying land and livestock for tax purposes. If you didn't own property, you basically didn't count, at least not in the eyes of the scribes. Historians still argue whether the numbers were even meant to be accurate or if they were just a convenient fiction to justify royal power. You can almost see the medieval bureaucrat, a quill pen tucked behind his ear, just shrugging and writing down a lot for the total. It's an honest approach, really. So we begin our slow trudge into a world where numbers were fluid, where 1,000 dead could easily become 10,000 in the hands of a good storyteller. Your shoes are getting muddy now, the air is getting colder, you pull your cloak tighter around you, but it offers little comfort. The journey isn't about precision, it's about understanding the scale of the horror. The way lives could be snuffed out with a casual brutality that feels alien to us now. Imagine a world where a local feud could spiral into a bloodbath, where an entire village could be put to the sword over a squabble about land or honor. The sheer casualness of violence, the way it could flare up without warning, is the first chilling fact you have to grapple with. The body count of a single battle might be lost to time, but the collective toll of countless small skirmishes, raids, and private wars is a number that truly boggles the mind. You're standing on that hill, staring at a history that is less a collection of grand battles and more a ceaseless, grinding attrition of human life, and we're just getting started. The cold wind is biting at your cheeks now, and you can almost hear the faint murmur of a world without a proper body count. It's a world you're not used to, where the end of a life was often as simple as a name not being written down. Back in the early medieval period, before grand armies and massive sieges were the norm, death often came in a much more personal, and arguably more terrifying, way: the mob. You hear a sound in the distance, like the rhythmic thump of a dozen feet on soft ground. It's a small group, maybe a few dozen people, their faces shadowed by the hoods of their cloaks. They're not soldiers, they're just people. This is the heart of what we're talking about. The first major massacres weren't always ordered by kings. They often sprang from the ground up, fueled by personal vengeance, superstition, or a sudden, brutal moment of madness. A man named Giselbert of Ghent, for example, might get into a drunken argument with his neighbour about a fence line, and before you know it, their whole families and a few friends are involved, and suddenly it's not a fistfight anymore, it's a brutal, chaotic free-for-all with axes and scythes. The records of these smaller-scale butcherings are often so vague they're barely a footnote. A small, quiet, and tragically common type of body count. A quirky fact you stumble upon as you watch this imagined scene unfold. In some regions, if a whole village participated in a massacre, the surviving members of the victim's family were given the right to take revenge on anyone in the mob, regardless of whether they were the ones who struck the final blow. It was a kind of communal guilt and a way to ensure that these feuds didn't just fade away, they festered. Historians still argue whether this system, sometimes called feud law, actually served to contain violence or just perpetuated a cycle of endless bloodshed. You get the sense it was probably the latter. It's like a family argument that somehow gets 1,000 years of extra time and ends with pitchforks. Maybe you can relate. The air thickens with the unspoken tension. You see a family on their knees, begging for their lives, not from a conquering army, but from their own neighbours. The casual cruelty is almost harder to stomach than the organised brutality of a battle. There is no grand purpose here, no glorious victory to be won. It's just messy. This kind of localized, mob-driven slaughter was so prevalent that it was just part of the background noise of life. The average person's chances of being caught in a large-scale battle were actually pretty slim, but the risk of being caught in a neighborhood riot that went horribly wrong was a very real threat. Mainstream historical fact, the early medieval period, sometimes called the Dark Ages, was not actually dark in the sense of a lack of culture, but it was certainly a time of decentralized power. This meant that the king or emperor wasn't always there to keep the peace, and local warlords or even just angry mobs filled the power vacuum, often with disastrous results for anyone caught in their path. It's a good reminder that not all history-altering events happen on a grand stage. Sometimes they happen right in your backyard. You're still standing there, watching the scene from afar, but the sounds begin to change. The single rhythmic thud of feet on dirt gives way to the thunder of thousands, a low rumble that feels less like a mob and more like a force of nature. The First Crusade is coming, and with it, a new scale of human destruction. This isn't your average history textbook crusade. You're not thinking about the grand politics or the religious fervor. Instead, you're focusing on the ground-level chaos. The casual brutality that came before any of the big battles even started. You feel the ground vibrate, a distant wave of sound that is less a marching song and more a hum of 1,000 hungry, desperate men. The First Crusade, the so-called People's Crusade, was a ragtag group, more of an armed pilgrimage than a trained army. Its body count, which is our focus tonight, started long before they reached the Holy Land. Remember that a mainstream historical fact about this period is that many of the Crusaders were not knights or nobles, but peasants and common folk, driven by a mix of religious zeal, the promise of land, and the simple desire to escape their desperate lives. They had no supply lines, no logistics, and very little discipline. So what happens when a massive, armed, and starving mob is let loose across Europe? Things get very, very ugly. You see the first signs of it now. The villages of Speyer and Worms, Jewish communities that had lived in peace for centuries, suddenly finding themselves the target of a mob's rage. It's a particularly chilling kind of massacre. There's no battlefield. There are no two armies facing off. It's just a village. You watch as a family is dragged from their home. They are not combatants, not soldiers. They are just people. And that's the point. A quirky fact you might not know is that some local bishops and nobles tried to protect the Jewish communities, but they were largely helpless against the sheer number and ferocity of the Crusaders. Bishop John of Speyer, for instance, even opened his palace to Jewish refugees. Historians still argue whether these bishops were motivated by genuine humanitarian concern, a desire to protect the tax base they relied on, or a mix of both. You can almost see the internal struggle. Do I protect these people, or do I risk my entire town being put to the sword by this rabble? What a fun choice. The number of victims from these initial Crusader massacres is, of course, debated, but estimates put it in the thousands, a chilling sign of things to come. The Crusaders, feeling righteous in their cause, simply saw the Jewish population as others and an easy target for their frustrations. This wasn't a strategic decision. It was an act of pure, unadulterated hatred and violence. As you follow the imagined column of these Crusaders, you see the path they left behind them is not a trail of glory, but a trail of blood and shattered homes. We are still a long way from the big battles, and already the numbers are stacking up, quietly and brutally. It's a hard truth to accept, that some of the worst carnage in history wasn't the result of a grand military plan, but the byproduct of uncontrolled human chaos. And that chaos That's what's going to carry us all the way to Jerusalem. The rumble of the Crusades' march has grown into a deafening roar now, and you find yourself standing not in a tranquil field, but before the massive stone walls of a city that feels impossibly ancient. The air is thick with dust and the low hum of 100,000 voices. This is the siege of Jerusalem in 1099, the bloody climax of the First Crusade. The body count from the march across Europe was a grim warm-up, but what happened here was a whole new level of terror. The Crusaders, after their long and arduous journey, finally reached their goal, and the pent-up frustration and religious zeal of 1,000 miles of hardship was about to be unleashed. The mainstream historical fact is that the city fell on July 15th, 1099. But that's just a date. It doesn't tell you about the smell, the sounds, or the chilling, methodical brutality that followed. You can almost feel the collective, breathless anticipation of the soldiers and camp followers who had sacrificed so much for this moment. They had trudged all this way, past the starving and the dead, past the cities they had ransacked, and now they were at the finish line. When the city walls were breached, the disciplined chaos of a trained army gave way to the brutal, unorganized slaughter of a mob. You find yourself walking through an imagined city street, a river of blood flowing at your feet. The chronicles from the time speak of men wading through ankle-deep blood, a gruesome, quirky fact that historians love to debate, whether this description was a literal exaggeration or an attempt to convey the sheer scale of the carnage. Given the time period, it's probably a bit of both. Historians still argue whether the numbers of dead, sometimes cited in the tens of thousands, were accurate or simply a way for the chroniclers to glorify their side by showing how righteous their victory was. You've heard this before, right? The numbers get bigger with every telling. The Crusaders killed everyone they could find, Muslims, Jews, even Eastern Christians who had been living peacefully in the city. A particularly horrifying tidbit is that the Jewish population was reportedly rounded up and burned alive in a synagogue. It was an act of pure, unadulterated religious and racial hatred, and the fact that it was carried out with such cold efficiency is what makes it so much more chilling than a simple battlefield death. A man named Raymond of Aguilera, a chronicler who was there, wrote that men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins. Whether that's literally true or not, the message is clear. The killing was total, indiscriminate, and absolute. There was no quarter given. The city was a slaughterhouse. You can almost hear the terrified screams, the ringing of steel, the horrifying silence that followed. This wasn't a battle. This was an extermination. The body count wasn't a product of two armies clashing. It was the result of a victorious army simply cleaning house. It's a sobering reminder that some of the greatest body counts in history came not from a prolonged struggle, but from a short, terrible moment of conquest. You are standing in the quiet aftermath of the siege of Jerusalem, the air no longer thick with the sounds of battle, but a heavy, unnatural silence. The streets have been cleansed, but the memory of what happened hangs in the air like a shroud. You've moved forward in time now, far from the small-scale massacres and the bloody end of the First Crusade. The ground beneath your feet feels different, firmer, and the air is dry and dusty. You've been transported to the vast, open plains of Asia, and you can feel a distant rumble that is no longer the sound of a small army, but something much, much bigger. This is the sound of the Mongols, and their body count is a number so staggering it almost defies comprehension. A mainstream historical fact is that the Mongol Empire, at its peak, was the largest contiguous land empire in history. But what's often overlooked is the brutal, almost inhuman efficiency with which they achieved that status. The Mongol conquests were not just about winning battles, they were about total submission, and if a city resisted, it was often wiped from the face of the earth. A quirky tidbit about their philosophy: they believed that if they were merciful to a city that resisted, it would embolden others to do the same. So, they made examples. A city that surrendered without a fight might be spared, but one that held out, even for a day, was often condemned to a horrific fate. This wasn't just a show of force, it was a psychological weapon designed to terrorize future opponents into immediate submission. You feel the ground shake now, a low tremor that you can feel in your teeth. You see them in the distance, not a disorganized mob like the Crusaders, but a disciplined, terrifying wave of horsemen. Their approach is quiet at first, a storm building on the horizon, The early Mongol invasions, particularly under Genghis Khan, were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Historians still argue whether the numbers of dead attributed to the Mongols, sometimes estimated in the tens of millions, are accurate or a wild exaggeration from frightened chroniclers. The truth is, we'll never know for sure. But the archaeological record in places like Central Asia and Persia tells a grim story. There are cities that simply disappear from the historical record. Their populations vanished, their very foundations erased. You look at the horizon and see the dust cloud getting closer. This isn't just an army on the march, it's a force intent on total destruction. You remember the small, personal grudges that led to the early medieval massacres and the religious fervor of the Crusaders, and you realize that what's coming now is something else entirely. It's a calculated, systematic brutality that has a single purpose: to ensure that the Mongol Empire faces no further resistance. It's a pragmatic, terrifying logic that turns a military campaign into a demographic catastrophe. You are just a tiny, insignificant observer, and the wind whips your cloak around you, a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature. The sound is a low, growing hum, and you know, without a doubt, that you are about to witness the beginning of the most devastating body count in history. The dust cloud is closer now, a monstrous, churning wave on the horizon, and you feel a strange mix of dread and awe. You're not just observing a group of riders, you're witnessing the physical manifestation of Genghis Khan's brutal efficiency. He didn't just win battles, he changed the very nature of warfare. This is no longer a world of chivalric combat or sieges for a single castle. This is a cold, calculated, and terrifying machine. A mainstream historical fact is that Genghis Khan himself never built a single monument to his conquests. His legacy was built on terror and submission. He understood that a city that surrendered without a fight was more valuable than one reduced to rubble. And the only way to ensure they surrendered was to make the alternative unthinkable. A quirky fact you might not have considered: the Mongols were masters of psychological warfare. They would often use human shields, driving civilian captives ahead of their armies to absorb arrow fire and make it harder for defenders to shoot. It's a particularly chilling detail, a reminder that the Mongols didn't just kill their enemies, they dehumanized them first. They were also known for faking retreats, a tactic that often lured enemy cavalry into an ambush. It wasn't about a fair fight, it was about total victory. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan's primary motivation was to create a unified world under his rule, or if it was simply a series of opportunistic conquests fueled by a desire for plunder and vengeance. You've heard this before, right? Was he a unifier or a butcher? The answer, for a lot of people, was that he was both, often at the same time. You can almost hear his voice in the wind, a single-minded philosophy of total annihilation. The greatest joy a man can know is to conquer his enemies and drive them before him, to ride their horses and take away their possessions, to see the faces of those who were dear to them bedewed with tears. It's a terrifyingly honest quote. It's not about glory or honor, but about pure, unvarnished power. He wasn't a knight in shining armor, he was a pragmatist with a bow and arrow. You watch the dust cloud roll closer, a physical representation of the massive death toll that is to come. Every city that resists, every population that stands in his way, will be put to the sword. This isn't just an army on the move, it's a force of demographic change. A tidal wave that will wipe entire cultures from the map. The body count isn't just a byproduct of the war, it's a central part of the strategy. It's the core of the message. You're just a tiny spectator in a world about to be turned upside down. The chill you feel now has nothing to do with the night. It has everything to do with the coming storm. The air is thick with the dust of 1,000 hooves, and you can almost feel the ground tremble beneath your feet. You are standing on the edge of a new world, one where a city's fate could be decided not by a single battle, but by a single decision. The Mongol army has arrived at the gates of Baghdad, a city that, at this moment in 1258, is the pinnacle of the Islamic Golden Age. A mainstream historical fact is that Baghdad was, for centuries, the world's center of science, culture, and learning. It had the largest library in the world, the House of Wisdom, which held an unimaginable number of books and scrolls. It was a beacon of light in a world that was in many ways. Still in the dark. It was, in short, everything the Mongols were not. And that's the tragedy. The Mongols, under the command of Hulagu Khan, a grandson of Genghis, arrived with a simple demand: surrender or be destroyed. The Caliph, al-Mustasim, believing his city to be impregnable and himself divinely protected, refused. This was his fatal mistake. A quirky fact about the siege is that the Mongols used a bizarre mix of terror and psychological warfare to break the city's spirit. They built a massive palisade around the city from felled date palms, a visual symbol that nobody was getting in or out. They also used captured Chinese engineers to build siege engines, a testament to their willingness to adopt any technology that would give them an advantage. You can almost see the Caliph's court looking out at this strange and terrifying spectacle and thinking, this can't be happening. The siege itself was relatively short, only about 12 days, but the aftermath was one of the most brutal and devastating events in medieval history. Once the walls were breached, the Mongols swarmed in, and the slaughter began. The body count is, as always, a matter of wild debate, with estimates ranging from 90,000 to over 1 million. Historians still argue whether the numbers were wildly inflated by terrified chroniclers, or if the slaughter was so total that it defies modern comprehension. What is known is that the city was utterly sacked. The Caliph himself was executed, reportedly rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses so as not to spill royal blood on the ground. A bizarre and morbidly respectful form of murder, the House of Wisdom, with all its priceless knowledge, was burned, and the Tigris River was said to have run black with the ink from the destroyed books. You feel a profound sense of loss. Standing in the imagined ruins of this once great city, it's not just the lives lost that are so staggering, but the knowledge, the culture, and the art that were erased in a few terrifying days. The destruction of Baghdad was not just a military victory, it was a cultural catastrophe, a body count that included not just people, but a library of human progress. And as you stand there, you can almost hear the whispered words of a chronicler, a warning to anyone who would dare stand against the Mongols. This is what happens when you refuse to surrender. This is the price of your defiance. It was a message that resonated for centuries and, for our purposes, it was a terrifyingly successful strategy. The dust from Baghdad has settled, leaving behind a silence that is more terrifying than any battle cry. But we aren't done with the nomadic conquerors yet. We've moved forward in time, and the air is once again filled with the hum of a conquering army. But this time, the scent is less of destruction and more of a macabre, artistic terror. You've been transported to a world ruled by a man named Tamerlane, or Timur the Lame, and his particular brand of body count is one of the most memorable in history. A mainstream historical fact is that Tamerlane was a Turco-Mongol conqueror who, in the late 14th century, built an empire that rivaled Genghis Khan's in both size and brutality. But he didn't just kill his enemies, he made a chilling statement with their deaths. You feel a profound sense of unease as you walk through a landscape that feels strangely symmetrical. There's a structure in the distance, a massive conical shape that is both unnervingly geometric and profoundly unnatural. A quirky fact about Tamerlane is that he was a connoisseur of siege warfare and a brilliant strategist, but he was also a builder of gruesome monuments. He would often order his soldiers to collect the skulls of the defeated and build them into towers or pyramids. It was his signature move, a kind of architectural calling card that was a terrifying warning to anyone who would dare resist him. Historians still argue whether these pyramids of skulls were a premeditated act of terror or a spontaneous act of brutality from a man who had seen too much war. It was probably a little bit of both. You stand before an imagined one of these skull towers, maybe in front of the ruins of Isfahan in Persia. The chronicles from the time speak of Tamerlane sparing only the artists and scholars of the city and then building a tower of 70,000 skulls from the rest of the population. 70,000. You can try to wrap your head around that number, but you just can't. It's too big. Too much. The wind whistles through the empty eye sockets. A hollow sound that feels like a collective sigh of the dead. This is a different kind of body count. It's not just the sum of the dead, it's a monument to their deaths. It's a statement. Remember that Crusader mob? They were messy, and their body count was a byproduct of their chaos. Tamerlane was different. His body count was a calculated, deliberate act. He wanted you to know what would happen if you resisted. He wanted you to be able to see the results. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature. You're no longer thinking about the abstract number of the dead, but the very real, very physical weight of their bones, stacked one upon the other. It's a macabre art installation, a grotesque sculpture built on human suffering. It's a silent, terrifying warning that stands for centuries, a physical reminder of the cost of defiance. The lesson is simple, and it's hammered home with every skull you see. Resistance is futile. It's a cold, hard logic that produced a body count on a scale that few people in history could ever match. And as you walk away, you can't get the image out of your head. You probably won't be able to get it out of your head all night. You are no longer in the dusty, skull-strewn plains of Persia. The air is damp and cool, and the scent of death is no longer a product of a single, horrific act, but a slow, creeping presence that hangs in the air everywhere you go. The landscape is strangely silent. The bustling cities you've seen in your mind's eye are eerily quiet. The sound of a bell tolling in the distance is the only sound you hear, and it tolls not for a battle, but for a constant, unending stream of the dead. We've come to a different kind of body count, a silent, invisible killer that makes all the previous slaughters look like a brief scuffle. This is the Black Death. A mainstream historical fact is that the bubonic plague, in its mid-14th century outbreak, wiped out an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population. Let that sink in for a moment. Not a region, not a city, but an entire continent. You walk through a village, and you see the signs of it everywhere. The doors of houses are marked with a red cross, a sign that the plague has taken hold inside. The streets are empty. You see a cat sitting on a windowsill, and you think, hey, cats and dogs were often slaughtered in a panic, as people believed they were carrying the disease. Ironically, this only made the problem worse, as the rat population, which carried the plague-infested fleas, was allowed to flourish. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or a localized hysteria, but the fact remains that in some places, people were just as dangerous as the disease itself. You can almost see the town mayor, a man with a wild look in his eye, trying to justify his decision. We have to do something. It's a dark kind of humor that only the plague could inspire. The numbers are simply too big to comprehend. The death count of the Mongols was in the millions, but the plague was in the tens of millions. It wasn't a quick, violent death on a battlefield. It was a slow, agonizing process. You feel a strange itch on your arm, and you instinctively glance down, a sudden paranoia taking hold. That's what it was like. Every person you saw was a potential carrier. Every cough, every sneeze was a source of terror. The social fabric of the entire continent began to unravel. People abandoned their families, priests refused to perform last rites, and society just stopped. The plague was not a single event, it was a process that unfolded over years, a slow, grinding attrition that was more terrifying than any army. You see a lone cart trundling down the street, and you know what it's for. The bodies were piling up too quickly to be buried properly. The body count of the Black Death is a number that truly puts all other historical tragedies into perspective. It wasn't about kings or empires or grudges. It was a biological force of nature that cared nothing for your social status or your military prowess. It was the ultimate, impersonal body counter, a scythe that swept across the continent with a chilling indifference. And as you stand in the quiet, deserted street, you realize that the most terrifying historical events are often the ones that are the quietest. The silence of the plague-ridden streets has a new layer now, one of desperation and confusion. The death toll is mounting, and you are no longer just an observer, but a witness to the profound social and psychological upheaval that accompanied it. The ground beneath your feet feels strangely soft, a mix of mud and something else. The scent of unburied bodies is thick in the air, a constant, sickening reminder of the unseen enemy. People, in their panic and grief, were trying to make sense of something that seemed utterly inexplicable. How do you fight a foe you can't see? A mainstream historical fact is that in the absence of a scientific explanation, people turned to superstition and religious fanaticism. This led to a grim, new kind of body count. You see a group of men walking down the road, their backs raw and bleeding, whipping themselves with knotted ropes. These are the flagellants, and a quirky tidbit about them is that they believed they could atone for humanity's sins and appease a wrathful God, who they believed was punishing them with the plague. They would march from town to town, chanting and performing these brutal acts of self-mutilation. Historians still argue whether they were a genuine religious movement or a mob fueled by hysteria and fear. But what is clear is that they added a new layer of terror to the landscape. They didn't just whip themselves, they also began to blame others for the plague, most notably the Jewish population, leading to a new wave of localized, mob-driven massacres. You can almost hear their chant, a low, guttural hum that is more terrifying than any battle cry. The ground is still soggy, and you see the reason why. A man is digging a shallow trench, and he's not alone. This is the new normal. The sheer number of the dead made traditional burials impossible. You remember the old medieval burial grounds? The little churchyards with their neat rows of crosses, they're full. So now, the dead are being buried in mass graves. Hastily dug pits where bodies are piled on top of each other like cordwood. The logistical nightmare of burying the dead was a constant, grueling process that simply couldn't keep up with the pace of the deaths. This is the uncounted body count. The people who were not given a proper burial, who were simply thrown into a pit and covered with dirt. The sheer scale of it is what's so hard to grasp. You're not just seeing death, you're seeing the total breakdown of a system, a society that can no longer even perform the most basic rituals of farewell. It's a terrifying sign that the world you once knew is gone. And what about the survivors? You see a man walking past, a look of profound grief in his eyes. He has no family left. The world is just empty. The societal breakdown was total, without a king to rule them, without a priest to comfort them, without a family to love them. People just drifted. The Black Death didn't just kill bodies, it killed culture. It killed trust, and it killed the very idea of a functioning society. It was a silent, and therefore all the more terrifying, kind of body count. You walk through this deserted landscape, and you can't help but wonder if anything will ever be the same. The answer, of course, is no. And we're about to see how that change unfolded. You're no longer walking through the quiet, plague-ridden streets. The landscape has changed again. The air is crisper. The scent of death has faded, replaced by the tang of salt from the English Channel. The sounds are different, too. The low hum of an army camp, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the distant, nervous chattering of men preparing for a battle. You have entered the long, drawn-out grind of the 100 Years' War, a conflict that didn't have a single, massive body count event like the plague, but instead produced a staggering, cumulative toll through a slow, grinding attrition. This is a different kind of horror, a war that seemed to last forever. A mainstream historical fact is that this conflict, which actually lasted 116 years, was not a continuous war but a series of intermittent conflicts, raids, and truces. But for the average person, it just felt like a constant state of being at war. You feel the ground beneath your feet, and it's no longer the soft soil of a burial ground but the hard-packed earth of a marching route. This is a war fought not just on a battlefield, but in the villages and towns of France. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is the prevalence of chevauchée, a French term for a raid where an army would ride through the countryside, burning crops and destroying towns in an effort to demoralize the enemy and weaken their economic base. It was a strategy of total war, a way of inflicting a body count without even facing an army. You can almost see the French peasant, cowering in his hut, listening to the thunder of hooves, not knowing if he was about to be put to the sword or just lose his entire life's work. It's a particularly cruel kind of warfare, a slow, methodical devastation that left a trail of death and famine in its wake. Historians still argue whether this tactic was truly effective in the long run, or if it just hardened the French resolve and turned a dynastic dispute into a war for survival. The 100 Years' War was less about a single climactic battle and more about a slow, grinding process of population reduction. It was a demographic nightmare, a quiet kind of massacre that unfolded over more than a century. The casualty numbers are, as always, impossible to know. But the cumulative effect on the population of France was devastating. You walk through a village that looks suspiciously empty, the fields are overgrown, and the houses are in disrepair. This is the quiet, unspoken body count of a long war, the people who died not from a sword, but from starvation, from disease, from a world that had simply ceased to be able to feed them. The 100 Years' War didn't just kill soldiers, it killed civilians. It killed an economy. And it killed the very idea of a world that wasn't perpetually at war. It was a different kind of horror. A testament to the fact that some of the greatest human costs in history aren't sudden and dramatic, but slow, quiet, and tragically relentless. You can almost feel the weight of it all. A crushing, silent pressure that lasted for over a century, and we're just getting started. The low hum of the English camp has faded, and you feel a strange calm wash over you. But it's a calm before a storm. The landscape before you is a field near the French village of Agincourt. And the year is 1415. This is a different kind of body count event, a single, decisive battle that became a slaughter of a very specific kind. The mainstream historical fact about Agincourt is that the English, under King Henry V, were vastly outnumbered by the French, perhaps as much as 6-1, and yet the English won a crushing victory. But our focus isn't on the victory, it's on the horrifying, disproportionate loss of life. You can almost feel the weight of the armour on the French knights. They were the crème de la crème of French nobility, and their armour, a quirky tidbit, was so heavy and cumbersome that once a knight fell, he often couldn't get back up on his own. You see a French knight fall into the churned-up mud, his heavy armour a death trap. He's not a soldier fighting, but a fish out of water. This is our key to understanding the Agincourt body count. The French, in their rush to engage, were funneled into a narrow, muddy field, where their numerical advantage became a liability. They were easy targets for the English longbowmen, and once they fell, they were either drowned in the mud or dispatched by the lighter-armed English soldiers. Historians still argue whether the English victory was a result of superior strategy, the French's overconfidence, or just the luck of a very narrow, muddy battlefield. Whatever the reason, the result was a staggering body count. The number of French noblemen killed was so high that it sent a shockwave through the French aristocracy. You can almost see the heralds in Paris, their faces grim, trying to count the dead and finding that an entire generation of their military leadership had been wiped out. The total number of French casualties is estimated to be around 6,000, while the English lost only a few hundred. This isn't just a lopsided victory, it's a massacre. The body count here is a testament not to the might of the English army, but to the tragic hubris of the French. It's a reminder that a high body count isn't always about a long, protracted war, but can be a single, brutal moment where a military tactic goes horribly wrong. You can almost hear the whispered epitaphs of the fallen, a generation of French knights, nobles, and soldiers, their lives ending not with a glorious charge, but in a muddy, suffocating embrace. The muddy field of Agincourt is fading from your mind's eye, and you feel the air change again. It's no longer the damp chill of a battlefield, but the stuffy, claustrophobic air of a windowless room. The smell of burning incense and old books hangs heavy, and the sounds are not of swords and arrows, but the soft scratch of a quill on parchment and the distant clank of chains. We've moved from the high body counts of open warfare to a different, more insidious kind of count, one that is not measured in battlefields but in whispered accusations and quiet executions. We are entering the world of the Spanish Inquisition. A mainstream historical fact is that the Inquisition, established in 1478, was a powerful tool used by the Spanish monarchs to enforce Catholic orthodoxy, but its body count is a source of intense scholarly debate. You are watching a scene unfold in a quiet, solemn room. An old man, his face a mask of fear, is being questioned by a somber-looking friar. The air is tense, not with the energy of a fight, but with the chilling weight of absolute authority. A quirky tidbit about the Inquisition is that its primary goal was not execution, but to get a confession and a public repentance. The most famous quote about the Inquisition, "No one expects the Spanish Inquisition," is a joke for a reason. It was a bureaucratic and legal process, not a sudden, violent raid. Historians still argue whether the Inquisition's methods were primarily about torture and fear or a more subtle form of psychological pressure to get a confession. The truth, of course, is that they were probably both. The actual number of people executed by the Spanish Inquisition is shockingly low compared to the body counts we've discussed. Estimates range from 2,000 to 10,000 over its entire 350-year history. You hear that number, and a part of your mind scoffs. only a few thousand. That's nothing compared to the Mongols. And that's the point. The Inquisition's body count was not about raw numbers, but about a body count of a different kind, the count of lives ruined, families destroyed, and a cultural terror that spread across the entire country. The auto da fe, the public ceremony where heretics were paraded and sentenced, was a spectacle designed to terrorize the population into obedience. It was a psychological war, a constant, low-level dread that you could be next. The body count here is not a tally of the dead, but a measure of the fear and control that was exerted over an entire nation. It's a chilling reminder that some of the greatest body counts in history are not measured in battlefields or plagues, but in the quiet, psychological toll that a culture of fear can inflict on a population. It's a quiet horror, a slow, methodical erasure of individuality and thought. You leave the room, and the silence of the streets feels more terrifying than any battle cry. The air is different now. The oppressive quiet of the Inquisition replaced by the nervous energy of a nation tearing itself apart. The ground beneath your feet feels strangely familiar. You're back on English soil, but this is not the England of a unified king. This is a country in the grip of a civil war, a conflict that was less about a foreign enemy and more about the tragic, self-inflicted wounds of a family feud. We are in the middle of the Wars of the Roses, a conflict that, over the course of 30 years, produced a series of brutal, often decisive battles that decimated the English aristocracy. The body count here is not just a number, it's a family tree being systematically cut down. A mainstream historical fact is that the Wars of the Roses were a series of dynastic civil wars fought between the houses of Lancaster and York for control of the English throne. The names of the two sides, Lancaster and York, were derived from their respective emblems, the red rose and the white rose. You stand on an imagined battlefield, maybe Towton, the site of what is considered to be the largest and bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. The air is cold, and the ground is covered in a fresh layer of snow. It's a quiet, surreal landscape for a war. A quirky tidbit about the Battle of Towton in 1461, it was fought in a blinding snowstorm, which made it impossible for the archers on either side to see their targets. The English chronicles of the time speak of a battle of blind men, where soldiers simply charged forward into the blinding snow, not knowing who or what they were swinging their swords at. Historians still argue whether the weather was a decisive factor or if the sheer exhaustion and chaos of the battle made it a slaughter regardless. The result was a catastrophic body count. Estimates range from 20,000 to 30,000 dead in a single day. An astonishing number for the time and a staggering loss for a country that was already tearing itself apart. The dead were not just soldiers, they were the very best of England's noble families, their bodies piled up in the snow. The Wars of the Roses were less about a single, massive battle and more about a series of brutal skirmishes and decisive moments. The body count here is a testament to the tragic, cyclical nature of revenge and power. The winner of one battle would execute the loser's family, only to have the roles reversed a few years later. It was a vicious cycle of vengeance that produced a high body count in a series of short, brutal bursts. You can almost hear the whispered names of the dead, the families who were wiped out, the castles that were left without an heir. It's a tragic story, a reminder that the most devastating conflicts are often the ones fought for personal gain, where a high body count is not a consequence of war, but the very goal. It's a sobering thought, a dark kind of irony that a country could bleed itself dry for a crown. You leave the snowy field of Towton, and the silence is not a result of peace, but of a profound, devastating emptiness. The bloody fields of England fade, and you feel the air grow warm, the scent of the sea thick with a strange mix of salt and decay. The sounds are of shouting in multiple languages, the clanking of armor, and the ominous creak of 1,000 siege engines. We are now in Italy, and you stand before a city that is not just a place, but an idea, Rome. The year is 1527, and what is about to happen here is not a battle of nations, but a chaotic, brutal sacking by an army of mercenaries. The body count here is a testament to what happens when discipline breaks down and a war machine is unleashed with no master to control it. A mainstream historical fact is that the sack of Rome was a devastating event carried out by the mutinous troops of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. The army was composed of a mix of German Lutherans and Spanish Catholics, a strange and volatile brew of religious and nationalistic fervor. You walk through the city, and the sense of impending doom is palpable. The air is thick with tension. A quirky tidbit about this event is that the mercenaries had not been paid in a long time, and they had been marching for months. Their commander, the Duke of Bourbon, was killed in the first moments of the siege, leaving the troops leaderless and without a source of control. It was a perfect storm of desperation, religious hatred, and a complete lack of discipline. Historians still argue whether Charles V gave a tacit order for the sack or if it was simply a tragic and inevitable consequence of his troops' mutiny. The result was a horrific, indiscriminate slaughter that lasted for over a week. The body count here is not about battle statistics, but about the pure, unadulterated rage of an army with no one to hold it back. You see the violence unfold in the streets, not the organized charge of a battlefield, but a series of small, brutal skirmishes in the alleys and homes of the city. The mercenaries, a strange mix of nationalities and religions, were fueled by both greed and a hatred of the Catholic Church. They didn't just kill, they looted, they tortured, and they desecrated. The Swiss Guard, the Pope's personal protectors, made a valiant last stand, allowing the Pope to escape. But they were cut down to a man. Their defense, a mainstream historical fact, is still commemorated every year, but their heroism was a tiny bright spot in a sea of darkness. The number of dead is, as always, debated, with estimates ranging from 8,000 to over 20,000 in a city that, at the time, had a population of just over 50,000. It's a staggering body count, a measure of how a city could be brought to its knees by an army that was, in a sense, fighting for no one but themselves. The bloody streets of Rome are fading from your mind, and the air has a new feel. The warm, sun-drenched scent of southern France, mixed with the sharp smell of fear and fanaticism. The sounds are of a low, chanting hymn, and the distant, chilling clang of a bell. We've returned to the concept of a crusade, but this is a very different one from the long march to Jerusalem. This is the Albigensian Crusade, a brutal and often forgotten chapter in history where the high body count was a result of a war fought against fellow Christians. A mainstream historical fact is that this crusade was launched by Pope Innocent III against the Cathars, a heretical Christian sect in the Languedoc region of France. The Cathars believed in a dualistic universe of good and evil, a belief system that the Catholic Church found deeply threatening. You stand at the walls of the city of Béziers in 1209, and the air is thick with tension. A siege is in progress. But the sounds are not of a long, drawn-out conflict, but of a mob's fury. A quirky tidbit about this crusade is that when the Crusaders took the city, a papal legate, a man named Arnold Amalric, was asked how to tell the heretics from the Catholics inside the city. His response, which is famous and chilling, was, "Kill them all. God will know his own." Historians still argue whether he actually said those words, but the fact that the sentiment was even attributed to him tells you everything you need to know about the mentality of the time. The result was a catastrophic body count. The Crusaders went on a rampage, slaughtering every man, woman, and child in the city, an act of unbridled butchery. The number of dead is estimated to be in the tens of thousands, a horrifying number for a single-day massacre. The body count of the Albigensian Crusade is a chilling reminder of what happens when religious fanaticism and military power combine. The crusade didn't end at Béziers, it continued for decades, a slow, methodical war of annihilation against an entire population. The body count wasn't just in the big battles and sieges, but in the quiet, brutal executions of Cathars who were caught and burned at the stake. It was a war to eradicate an idea, and the method was to simply eradicate the people who held it. You can almost hear the soft, final whispers of the heretics, a testament to the fact that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid for a belief. You leave the dusty streets of Béziers, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a total and complete victory. The stench of burnt flesh from the Albigensian Crusade fades, and the air has a new, different kind of chill, the bone-deep cold of the Baltic region. The landscape is a mix of dense forests and frozen lakes, and the sounds are not of a frenzied mob, but of the rhythmic chopping of axes and the low, guttural chanting of a different kind of crusader. We've moved to a lesser-known but no less brutal theatre of war, the Northern Crusades. A mainstream historical fact is that these were a series of campaigns undertaken by Christian military orders and kingdoms to convert and subjugate the pagan peoples of the Baltic and Finnic regions in the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries. The body count here is a quiet, grinding, and tragically effective one. You are walking with a Teutonic knight, a man clad in a white tunic with a black cross. He is a soldier of a different sort, a warrior monk. A quirky tidbit about these knights is that they were not just a military order, but also a sovereign state. The Teutonic Order, which ruled over vast territories and even founded cities. Their goal was less about salvation and more about conquest. And their method was a slow, methodical war of attrition. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation of these crusades was religious conversion or a simple land grab. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a high body count. The body count here is not a result of a single, decisive battle, but of a centuries-long process of conquest, a quiet kind of massacre that unfolded over generations. You can almost feel the fear of the pagan peoples, the Prussians, the Lithuanians, and the Estonians. They were fighting not just a professional army, but a religious organization with the backing of the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire. The body count here is a testament to what happens when an organized, well-funded military machine is brought to bear on a disorganized, tribal people. The body count is also a testament to a different kind of death, the death of a culture. As you walk through the imagined forests, you see the remnants of pagan shrines and temples, burned and replaced with Christian churches. The very identity of a people was being wiped out, a quiet, almost imperceptible kind of body count that is more devastating than any single battle. The Northern Crusades didn't just kill people, they killed a way of life. It's a chilling reminder that some of the greatest body counts are not measured in battlefields, but in the slow, grinding process of cultural annihilation. You leave the cold forests of the North, and the silence is not a result of peace, but of a profound and tragic victory. The cold, dense forests of the Baltic have faded, and the air is now thick with the scent of spices, the warmth of the Mediterranean sun, and a profound sense of decay. The sounds are not of battle cries, but of a quiet, slow-motion conflict, the death rattle of a once great empire. You are witnessing the slow decline of the Byzantine Empire and the grinding, relentless rise of the Ottomans. The body count here isn't a single, spectacular event, but a slow, decades-long war of attrition. A mainstream historical fact is that the Byzantine Empire, once the powerful eastern half of the Roman Empire, was in a state of long, slow decay for centuries before its final collapse. But what hastened its demise and drove up the body count was the relentless pressure from the rising Ottoman Empire. You feel a profound weariness, the kind that comes from a conflict that has no end in sight. You see a series of small, grinding sieges. A Byzantine town falls, its population is enslaved or killed, a fortress is taken, its defenders are put to the sword. This is not the glorious charge of knights, this is the slow, methodical erosion of an entire civilization. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is that the Ottomans, in their early stages, were a brilliant and pragmatic people. They were happy to hire Christian mercenaries and even adopted some of the best military technologies from their enemies. This wasn't a religious war in the way the Crusades were, it was a pragmatic, political war for dominance. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans saw themselves as a new caliphate or simply a new empire in the Roman tradition. The result, regardless of their ideology, was a staggering human toll. The body count here is a testament to the tragedy of a long, drawn-out conflict. The numbers of the dead aren't a result of a single battle, but of countless small skirmishes, raids, and sieges over decades. The population of the Byzantine Empire dwindled, not just from war, but from the constant fear, the lack of a stable economy, and the accompanying famines and plagues that came with a state of perpetual conflict. You can almost see the people of the Byzantine Empire watching their world shrink, a city here, a town there, falling to the ever-encroaching Ottoman tide. It's a quiet, tragic body count, a measure of how a world can die not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing whimper. The Ottomans, in their patient and pragmatic way, simply outlasted their enemies, and their victory was a demographic one as much as it was a military one. You leave this place, and the sense of weariness hangs in the air like a shroud. You know that this slow, agonizing process is about to have a violent and final conclusion. The slow, grinding death of an empire has reached its final, violent moment. The air is no longer just filled with the scent of spices and decay, but with the sharp smell of gunpowder and the thunderous roar of cannons. We have arrived at the gates of Constantinople, a city that, for 1,000 years, had stood as a bastion of Christianity and the last remnant of the Roman Empire. The year is 1453, and this is the final, bloody body count of a long war. A mainstream historical fact is that the fall of Constantinople marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and, to many historians, the end of the Middle Ages. But for the people inside the city, it was a terrifyingly personal catastrophe. You stand on the city walls, looking out at the massive Ottoman army, and you can't help but feel a profound sense of awe. The Ottomans, under Sultan Mehmed II, brought a new kind of weapon to the siege, massive cannons, built by a Hungarian engineer named Orban. A quirky tidbit about this is that the Byzantine Emperor, Constantine XI, had actually tried to hire Orban first, but couldn't afford his exorbitant fee, so he went to the Ottomans instead. You can almost see the emperor, a frustrated look on his face, watching his city's walls crumble from a weapon he could have, and probably should have, had. Historians still argue whether the fall of the city was due to Ottoman superiority in artillery or a simple matter of overwhelming numbers. The result was a catastrophic body count. Once the walls were breached, the Ottoman soldiers poured into the city, and the slaughter began. The number of dead is, as always, a matter of debate, with estimates ranging from 4,000 to over 50,000. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. The body count here is not just a number of the dead, but a measure of what was lost. The Byzantine Emperor, Constantine XI, was killed defending his city, a tragic and heroic last stand that sealed the end of a 1,000-year empire. The Hagia Sophia, the magnificent church that had been the spiritual heart of the Byzantine world, was desecrated and turned into a mosque. The city's population was either killed, enslaved, or fled in terror. It was a total and absolute victory. You feel a profound sense of finality. This isn't just the end of a city or a battle, it's the end of an era. The fall of Constantinople was a testament to the fact that even the most ancient and powerful institutions could fall, and that the body count of history is not just about the number of lives lost, but about the number of worlds that are erased. You leave the city, and the silence is not a result of peace, but of a profound and tragic victory that changed the course of history forever. The thunder of cannons at Constantinople has faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the damp, earthy scent of a freshly ploughed field. But this is not a tranquil countryside. It is a landscape of rebellion and profound rage. The sounds are not of a professional army, but of a disorganized, angry mob, the low, guttural murmur of desperate men who have nothing left to lose. We are now in France, in the year 1358, and this is the Jacquerie, a violent peasant revolt that produced a swift, brutal, and utterly devastating body count. A mainstream historical fact is that the Jacquerie was a major peasant uprising in northern France during the 100 Years' War. The peasants, known contemptuously as Jacques, were pushed to the breaking point by a combination of famine, plague, and the constant plundering of both French and English armies. You walk with this mob, and you feel their rage, their desperation, their profound sense of injustice. They are not fighting for a king or a flag, they are fighting for their very survival. They are not knights or soldiers, they are farmers, peasants, and serfs, armed with whatever they can find: scythes, pitchforks, clubs. A quirky tidbit about this revolt is that the peasants believed they were fighting to protect the king from his traitorous nobles, who were seen as the source of all their suffering. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine belief or a convenient fiction to justify their brutal actions. The result was a catastrophic body count. The peasants, in their fury, went on a rampage, burning castles, killing nobles, and committing acts of horrific violence against their social superiors. The nobles, for their part, responded with an equally brutal and much more organized kind of revenge. The body count here is not a result of a prolonged war, but of a brief, violent, and utterly unforgiving suppression. The nobles, once they got over their initial shock, organized themselves and began to hunt down the peasants with a ruthless efficiency. The chronicles from the time speak of a horrific slaughter. The peasants, with their makeshift weapons and lack of discipline, were no match for the armored knights on horseback. It was less of a battle and more of an extermination. The numbers of dead are, as always, debated, with some estimates reaching into the tens of thousands. The body count here is a testament to the fact that when the oppressed rise up, the powerful respond with a disproportionate and utterly devastating kind of violence. It's a sobering reminder that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid by the poor and powerless. A quiet, forgotten kind of body count that is a testament to the brutality of class conflict. The rage of the French peasants has faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the damp, foggy chill of England. The landscape is a mix of green fields and rolling hills, but the mood is anything but tranquil. The sounds are of a new kind of protest, a new kind of rebellion, the determined march of a people who have had enough. We are now in England, in the year 1381, and this is the Peasants' Revolt, a massive uprising that produced a swift and brutal body count that, while not as high as the Jacquerie, was a testament to the swiftness with which a powerful state can crush dissent. A mainstream historical fact is that this revolt, led by a man named Wat Tyler, was sparked by a highly unpopular poll tax, a new tax levied on every person regardless of their wealth. You walk with this mob, and you feel their sense of purpose, their quiet determination. They are not just angry, they are organized. They are marching on London, a city of immense wealth and power, and they have a clear set of demands. A quirky tidbit about this revolt is that the rebels, in their march to London, were said to have carried a banner of St. George, a symbol of English national identity, and they were, at least initially, treated with a strange mix of fear and respect by the people they encountered. This wasn't a mob of mindless brutes, it was a political movement. Historians still argue whether the rebellion was a genuine political movement or just a spontaneous outburst of rage. The result was a tragic body count. Once the rebels reached London, they were initially successful. They burned down the Savoy Palace, the home of John of Gaunt, the king's powerful uncle. They even gained access to the Tower of London, where they executed the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord High Treasurer. But the king, the young Richard II, was a shrewd negotiator. He met with the rebels and promised to abolish serfdom and grant a general pardon. Wat Tyler, in a moment of triumph, met with the king and was promptly killed by the mayor of London. With their leader dead, the mob lost its cohesion, and the king's forces, which had been gathering outside the city, moved in and began to hunt down the rebels with a chilling efficiency. The body count here is not about a long, protracted war, but about a brief, violent moment where a political movement was crushed with a single, brutal act. The numbers of dead are debated, but the psychological impact was profound. The Peasants' Revolt was a reminder that even a king who seems to be on your side can, in a moment, become a ruthless and terrifying enemy. The chaos of the English Peasants' Revolt has faded, and you feel the air change, becoming the cold, crisp scent of Bohemia. The sounds are not of a peasant mob, but of a different kind of fanaticism, the low, guttural murmur of a religious army. We are now in the midst of the Hussite Wars, a conflict that produced a series of high body count events rooted not in dynastic feuds or power struggles, but in a theological dispute. A mainstream historical fact is that the Hussite Wars, which raged in Bohemia from 1419 to around 1434, were fought between the followers of Jan Hus, a religious reformer, and the forces of the Holy Roman Empire, who saw him as a heretic. You walk with this new army, and you feel their profound sense of righteousness, a faith that has been hardened by persecution. They are not knights or professional soldiers, they are farmers, craftsmen, and even women, all united by a single belief. A quirky tidbit about these wars is that the Hussites developed a revolutionary military tactic, the use of wagons as mobile fortifications. They would circle their wagons, turning them into a kind of medieval tank, and use cannons and handguns to mow down their enemies. This innovation was so effective that they were able to defeat much larger better equipped armies. Historians still argue whether their military success was due to their innovative tactics or the sheer, unshakable faith of their soldiers. The result was a catastrophic body count. The Hussites, in their zeal, often showed little mercy to their enemies, and their enemies, in turn, were terrified of them. The body count here is a testament to the fact that when religion is the cause, the violence can be particularly brutal. The numbers of dead are debated, but the fighting was so intense that it left a lasting scar on the region. The wars weren't just about winning battles, they were about a complete and total victory, a war for the very soul of a people. You see the aftermath of one of their battles, a field littered with bodies, a mix of armoured knights and peasants, all killed with the same brutal indifference. The Hussite wars were a chilling reminder that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid for a belief. You leave the cold fields of Bohemia, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic religious war that left a trail of death and destruction in its wake. The echoes of the Hussite wars have faded, and the air has a new, different kind of chill, not the cold of a battlefield, but the bone-deep terror of a reputation. The ground beneath your feet feels strangely soft, a mix of dirt and something else. The sounds are not of a marching army, but of the faint, rhythmic pounding of a hammer. We are now in Wallachia, a small region in modern-day Romania, and we are in the presence of a man whose body count was not just a grim statistic, but a chilling form of psychological warfare. This is Vlad the Impaler. A mainstream historical fact is that Vlad III, the Prince of Wallachia, was a brilliant military commander who fiercely resisted the Ottoman expansion into Europe, but his method for doing so was what made him a legend and a nightmare. You are walking through a forest, but this is a forest unlike any you have ever seen. The trees are not just trees, they are a grotesque gallery of the dead. A quirky tidbit about Vlad is that he was a master of psychological warfare. He would not just kill his enemies, he would impale them. A brutal and agonizing form of execution where a person was skewered on a sharpened stake. The stakes were then erected in a forest-like formation, a chilling and terrifying sight for any approaching army. You can almost hear the whispered words of a chronicler, a warning to anyone who would dare cross him: you are entering a forest of the dead. Historians still argue whether his methods were a sign of true sadism or a pragmatic, if brutal, strategy to deter a much larger and more powerful enemy. The result, regardless of his motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead from his various acts of terror are debated, with some estimates reaching into the tens of thousands. The body count here is not just a number, but a measure of fear. Vlad the Impaler didn't need to win every battle, he just needed to make the cost of fighting him so high that his enemies simply gave up. The sight of a forest of the dead was a much more effective weapon than any cannon or sword. It was a silent, terrifying warning that left a profound psychological scar on his enemies. You feel a profound sense of unease. You are no longer just an observer, but a witness to a kind of horror that is not just about the loss of life, but about the brutal, dehumanizing way in which it was taken. The body count here is a testament to the fact that some of the greatest human costs in history are not measured in battle, but in the psychological terror that can be inflicted by a single, determined, and terrifying individual. You leave the forest of the impaled, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic victory of terror. The forest of the impaled has faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the hot, dusty wind of Hungary. The sounds are of a new, desperate kind of battle, a final stand against an overwhelming force. We are now in the year 1526, and we are witnessing the Battle of Mohacs, a decisive and utterly devastating body count event that changed the course of European history. A mainstream historical fact is that this battle was fought between the Kingdom of Hungary, led by King Louis II, and the Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. It was a clash of two worlds, and the result was a catastrophic body count that effectively ended Hungarian independence. You stand on the battlefield, and you feel the profound sense of dread. The Hungarian army, a mix of nobles, knights, and peasants, is brave but outnumbered and outgunned. The Ottomans have a massive force, including their elite janissaries, a group of highly disciplined infantry. A quirky tidbit about this battle is that the Hungarian cavalry, in a moment of reckless bravery, charged the Ottoman lines, thinking they could break them with a single blow. It was a tragic mistake. The Ottoman army simply opened their lines, absorbed the charge, and then closed in, cutting down the disorganized Hungarians. Historians still argue whether the Hungarian king's decision to engage in a pitched battle against a superior force was a tragic miscalculation or a last, desperate gamble. The result was a horrific body count. The numbers of dead are debated, with some estimates reaching over 14,000 for the Hungarian army, including King Louis II and the majority of his noblemen. The body count here is not just a number, but a measure of what was lost. The Battle of Mohacs wasn't just a defeat, it was a total and complete annihilation of the Hungarian army. With their king and their leaders dead, the country was left leaderless and vulnerable to the Ottoman advance. It was a body count that was so devastating that it effectively ended the Kingdom of Hungary as a sovereign state and ushered in centuries of Ottoman rule. You feel a profound sense of finality. This wasn't just a battle, it was an execution. It's a sobering reminder that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid in a single, tragic moment. A body count that doesn't just end lives, but ends a nation. The crushing defeat at Mohacs has faded, and you feel the air grow cold and damp again, the scent of the sea thick with the promise of conflict. The landscape is a mix of dense forests, frozen rivers, and the quiet, desolate beauty of the Baltic region. But this is not the peaceful north you saw before. This is a place of a new kind of body count, a war that was less about a single climactic battle and more about a brutal, decades-long grind between powerful states. We are now in the midst of the Livonian War, a conflict that, from 1558 to 1583, produced a staggering human toll in a part of the world that is often overlooked. A mainstream historical fact is that the Livonian War was a brutal struggle for control of the territories of Old Livonia, modern-day Estonia and Latvia, fought between Russia, Poland, Lithuania, Sweden, and Denmark. You stand in the cold air, and you feel the profound sense of exhaustion that comes from a war that seems to have no end. You see a series of small, brutal sieges and raids. A Livonian town falls. Its population is put to the sword or enslaved. A fortress is taken, and its defenders are massacred. This is not the glorious charge of knights. This is a war of attrition, a slow, methodical erasure of an entire population. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is that the Livonian Order, a German military order that had ruled the region for centuries, was so weak and disorganized that it was essentially a spectator to its own demise. They were like a homeowner watching 4 different guys fight over their lawn. Historians still argue whether the war was primarily a result of Russian expansionism or a scramble for power by the other Baltic states. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The body count here is a testament to the tragedy of a long, drawn-out conflict. The numbers of the dead aren't a result of a single battle, but of countless small skirmishes, raids, and sieges over a quarter of a century. The population of Livonia dwindled, not just from war, but from the constant fear, the lack of a stable economy, and the accompanying famines and plagues that came with a state of perpetual conflict. You can almost see the people of Livonia, watching their world shrink, a city here, a town there, falling to one army or another. It's a quiet, tragic body count, a measure of how a world can die, not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing whimper. The great powers, in their patient and pragmatic way, simply outlasted their enemies, and their victory was a demographic one as much as it was a military one. You leave this place, and the sense of weariness hangs in the air like a shroud. You know that this slow, agonizing process is about to have a violent and final conclusion. The brutal, grinding war in Livonia has faded, and the air has a new feel, the warm, perfumed air of Paris. But it is laced with a profound and sudden horror. The sounds are not of a marching army, but of screams, panicked shouts, and the chilling clang of church bells ringing in the night. We are now in the year 1572, and we are witnessing the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, a body count event that was not a product of war, but of a sudden, brutal, and utterly devastating act of religious violence. A mainstream historical fact is that this massacre began on the night of August 23, 1572, and was a targeted assassination of a number of prominent Protestant leaders who had gathered in Paris for a royal wedding. You are walking through the streets of Paris, and you feel the profound sense of betrayal. The city is in a state of chaos, a sudden, terrifying switch from a city of celebration to a city of slaughter. A quirky tidbit about this event is that the signal for the beginning of the massacre was the ringing of the bell of the church of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois. You can almost see the people of Paris, a mix of Catholics and Protestants, waking up to the sound of that bell and knowing, with a profound sense of dread, that something terrible was happening. Historians still argue whether the massacre was a premeditated act by the king, Charles IX, and his mother, Catherine de' Medici, or a spontaneous outburst of mob violence that spun out of control. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are, as always, debated, with some estimates reaching into the tens of thousands across France. The body count here is not about battle statistics. It's about a sudden, terrifying moment of organized butchery. The violence was indiscriminate, with Catholic mobs hunting down and killing Protestants, often in their own homes. The most famous victim was Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, a Huguenot leader, who was assassinated in his bed and then thrown from a window. His body was then mutilated and dragged through the streets of Paris. The body count here is a testament to the fact that when religious hatred is given a free hand, the results can be even more terrifying than a battlefield. It's a chilling reminder that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid in the quiet of the night. In a sudden, brutal moment of violence that changed the course of a nation, you leave the city of Paris. And the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic victory of terror. The blood-soaked streets of Paris have faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the damp, foggy chill of the Low Countries. The landscape is a mix of bustling port towns and flat, green countryside. But the mood is anything but tranquil. The sounds are of a new kind of conflict, a war that was less about a single decisive battle and more about a brutal, decades-long struggle for independence. We are in the midst of the Dutch Revolt, a war that, from 1568 to 1648, produced a staggering human toll in a part of the world that was a mix of religious fervour and economic ambition. A mainstream historical fact is that the Dutch Revolt, also known as the 80 Years' War, was the struggle by the Protestant 17 provinces of the Netherlands against the rule of Catholic Spain. You stand on a city wall, maybe in Leiden, and you feel the profound sense of determination that comes from a people who have had enough. The Spanish, under the brutal command of the Duke of Alba, were trying to crush the rebellion with a terrifyingly high body count strategy. Alba, a quirky tidbit, was so ruthless that he was known as the Iron Duke and even had a special tribunal, the Council of Troubles, which was nicknamed the Council of Blood. Historians still argue whether the Spanish were genuinely trying to crush a heresy or if they were simply trying to maintain a profitable piece of their empire. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic human toll. The body count here is a testament to the tragedy of a long, drawn-out conflict. The numbers of the dead aren't a result of a single battle, but of countless small skirmishes, sieges, and brutal acts of reprisal over 8 decades. The population of the Low Countries dwindled, not just from war, but from the constant fear, the lack of a stable economy, and the accompanying famines and plagues that came with a state of perpetual conflict. You can almost see the people of the Netherlands watching their world shrink, a city here, a town there, falling to the Spanish army. It's a quiet, tragic body count, a measure of how a world can die not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing whimper. The Dutch, in their patient and pragmatic way, simply outlasted their enemies, and their victory was a demographic one as much as it was a military one. You leave this place, and the sense of weariness hangs in the air like a shroud. You know that this slow, agonizing process is about to have a violent and final conclusion. The long, grinding war in the Netherlands has faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming a mix of cold, humid air and a profound, collective dread. The sounds are not of a localized war, but of a continent-wide conflict, a new kind of body count that was less about a single nation and more about a complete, total catastrophe. We are now in the midst of the 30 Years' War, a conflict that, from 1618 to 1648, produced a staggering human toll that makes all the previous conflicts look like a warm-up act. A mainstream historical fact is that this war, which was initially a religious conflict between Protestant and Catholic states in the Holy Roman Empire, spiraled into a general European war involving most of the major powers. You are walking through the countryside, But this is a landscape of profound ruin. The fields are not just empty, they are overgrown with weeds. The villages are not just quiet, they are burned out husks. The sounds are not of a single army, but of a dozen different armies. Swedish, Spanish, French, German, all marching, looting, and killing. A quirky tidbit about this war is that it was fought largely by mercenary armies who had no real loyalty to any one side. They were, in essence, a business, and their product was war. This meant that they were just as likely to turn on the people they were supposed to be protecting as they were to fight the enemy. Historians still argue whether the war was primarily about religion or a simple grab for political power. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are, as always, debated, but the estimates are staggering, with some historians putting the total at over 8 million people. The body count here is not a result of a single battle, but of a complete and total collapse of society. The war was so brutal and so long that it led to widespread famine and plague, which, in many regions, killed more people than the fighting itself. The population of the Holy Roman Empire, a mainstream fact, was reduced by as much as 40% in some areas. This wasn't a war that was fought in a series of battles, it was a slow, grinding attrition that simply wiped entire populations from the face of the earth. You feel a profound sense of loss, a chilling reminder that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid by a world that has simply lost its mind. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The profound emptiness of the 30 Years' War has settled in. But it wasn't just the battles that created the catastrophic body count. The air now feels heavy with a different kind of dread. Not the sudden terror of a charge, but the slow, agonizing pain of a famine. The sounds are not of swords and cannons, but of the soft, desperate whimpering of a starving child. We are now in a world where war and pestilence conspired to create a new, terrifying kind of body count. A mainstream historical fact is that in many regions during the 30 Years' War, more people died from famine and disease than from direct combat. It was a vicious cycle. The armies would destroy crops and steal food, leading to starvation, and the malnutrition would weaken the population, making them more susceptible to disease. You are walking through a landscape that is both beautiful and terrifying. The fields are not being farmed. The cattle are not in the pastures. The sounds of a thriving countryside have been replaced by a profound and unnatural silence. A quirky tidbit about this period is that some mercenary soldiers, in their desperation for food, resorted to cannibalism. A horrifying fact that was recorded by multiple chroniclers. This was not a result of a lack of civilization, but a complete breakdown of it. Historians still argue whether the war was so devastating because of the ruthlessness of the armies or because the existing social and economic structures were simply too fragile to withstand such a prolonged conflict. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are, as always, debated, but the psychological toll was profound. The body count here is not a result of a single battle, but of a slow, grinding process of attrition. You can almost see the people of the Holy Roman Empire watching their world crumble, their families starving, their homes being destroyed. It's a quiet, tragic body count, a measure of how a world can die not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing whimper. The war didn't just kill people, it killed an economy. It killed a way of life. And it killed the very idea of a world that wasn't perpetually at war. It was a different kind of horror, a testament to the fact that some of the greatest human costs in history aren't sudden and dramatic, but slow, quiet, and tragically relentless. You can almost feel the weight of it all, a crushing, silent pressure that lasted for over a century, and we're just getting started. The slow, grinding horrors of the 30 Years' War have brought us to a single, brutal moment that encapsulates all the conflict's savagery. The air now feels heavy with the scent of smoke and the coppery tang of blood. The sounds are not of a marching army, but of a chaotic, terrifying rampage. We are now in the city of Magdeburg, and the year is 1631. This is the siege of Magdeburg, an event that produced a body count so horrific that it became a byword for military cruelty for centuries. A mainstream historical fact is that the city, a Protestant stronghold, was besieged by Catholic forces of the Holy Roman Empire, led by Count Tilly. When the city finally fell, the soldiers went on a rampage that was so brutal it shocked even the people of that time. You are walking through the streets, and you feel a profound sense of terror. This is not a battle, it is an extermination. The soldiers, unpaid and undisciplined, were given free rein to loot and kill. A quirky tidbit about this event is that Count Tilly, a devout Catholic, was so horrified by the slaughter that he reportedly rode through the streets on horseback, trying to stop his men, but he was powerless. Historians still argue whether the sack was a premeditated act of terror or a tragic and inevitable consequence of an army that had been pushed to its breaking point. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the estimates are staggering, with some historians putting the total at over 20,000 in a city with a population of 25,000. The body count here is a testament to the fact that when a military discipline breaks down, the results can be even more terrifying than a battlefield. The soldiers didn't just kill, they looted, they tortured, and they desecrated. The city was almost completely burned to the ground, and only a handful of buildings were left standing. The body count here is a measure of what happens when war is no longer about strategy or victory, but about pure, unadulterated savagery. You feel a profound sense of loss, a chilling reminder that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid when a war machine is unleashed with no master to control it. You leave the burning city of Magdeburg, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The burning, silent city of Magdeburg has faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the familiar, damp chill of England. But this is not the England of the Wars of the Roses. This is the England of a new kind of body count, the English Civil War, a conflict that pitted neighbour against neighbour and family against family. A mainstream historical fact is that the English Civil War, which raged from 1642 to 1651, was fought between parliamentarians, or Roundheads, and Royalists, or Cavaliers, over the governance of England. It was a war that tore a nation apart and, like so many other conflicts, produced a high body count from a combination of battle, disease, and starvation. You stand on a battlefield, maybe Marston Moor, and you feel a strange sense of confusion. The soldiers on both sides are English. They speak the same language, they share the same culture, and yet they are trying to kill each other with a brutal efficiency. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is that the soldiers often had very clear, and sometimes very different, ideas about what they were fighting for. One might be fighting for the king, another for the rights of Parliament, and a third for their religious beliefs. It was a war of ideologies as much as it was a war of armies. Historians still argue whether the war was primarily a result of a power struggle between the king and Parliament or a deeply rooted religious conflict. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the total is estimated to be over 200,000, a staggering number for a country with a population of only around 5 million. The body count here is a testament to the tragedy of a self-inflicted wound. The war was fought not just on a battlefield, but in the towns and villages of England, where families were torn apart by conflicting loyalties. The high body count was not just a result of the fighting, but of the accompanying plagues and famines that came with a state of perpetual conflict. You can almost see the people of England watching their world crumble, their families torn apart by a conflict that seemed to have no end. It's a quiet, tragic body count, a measure of how a nation can bleed itself dry for an idea. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The self-inflicted wounds of the English Civil War have faded, and you feel the air change dramatically, becoming warm, humid, and thick with a new, terrifying scent, the smell of a world dying. The sounds are not of a marching army, but of a quiet, profound silence. The stillness that follows a catastrophe. We are now in the Americas, and we are witnessing the start of the Spanish colonization and the catastrophic body count of indigenous populations. A mainstream historical fact is that the arrival of Europeans in the New World led to a demographic collapse of the indigenous populations, a quiet and utterly devastating kind of body count that dwarfed all previous military conflicts. You stand on the shores of a new world, a place of stunning beauty and profound tragedy. The air is still, but you can feel the weight of a silent killer. A quirky tidbit about this period is that the indigenous peoples of the Americas, having been isolated from the rest of the world for thousands of years, had no immunity to European diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza. The Europeans, of course, had no idea they were carrying these deadly pathogens. Historians still argue whether the demographic collapse was an unintended consequence of biological exchange or a deliberate act of genocide. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the estimates are staggering, with some historians putting the total at over 90% of the indigenous population in some regions. This wasn't a war fought with swords and cannons, it was a war fought with germs. The body count here is not a result of a single battle, but of a slow, grinding process of attrition. You can almost see the people of the Americas watching their world crumble, their families dying, their way of life disappearing. It's a quiet, tragic body count. A measure of how a world can die not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing whimper. The arrival of the Europeans didn't just kill people, it killed cultures, it killed traditions, and it killed the very idea of a world that was not perpetually at war. It was a different kind of horror, a testament to the fact that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid by the poor and powerless. A quiet, forgotten kind of body count that is a testament to the brutality of a world that has simply lost its mind. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The profound silence of the Americas has faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the cold, damp chill of a European winter. But this is not the winter of a war. This is the winter of a different kind of body count, the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. A mainstream historical fact is that this famine was a widespread catastrophe that affected most of northern Europe, killing millions of people. It was a famine caused not by war, but by a sudden, catastrophic change in weather patterns that led to a series of crop failures. You are walking through a landscape of profound ruin. The fields are not being farmed, the cattle are not in the pastures. The sounds of a thriving countryside have been replaced by a profound and unnatural silence. A quirky tidbit about this period is that the price of grain went up so much that it was often used as a kind of currency. People would sell their children into servitude for a few handfuls of grain. Historians still argue whether the famine was a result of a long-term shift in climate or a series of unfortunate weather events. The result, regardless of the cause, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the total is estimated to be in the millions. The body count here is a testament to the fact that when nature turns against us, the results can be even more terrifying than a battlefield. The famine didn't just kill people, it killed an economy, it killed a way of life, and it killed the very idea of a world that was not perpetually on the brink of collapse. It was a different kind of horror. A testament to the fact that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid when a world that has simply lost its mind. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The slow, agonizing pain of the Great Famine has faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the hot, dusty wind of the Balkans and Central Europe. The sounds are not of a famine, but of a new kind of body count, the long, grinding war between the Ottoman and Habsburg empires. A mainstream historical fact is that this conflict, which lasted for centuries, was a series of sieges, battles, and raids that produced a staggering cumulative death toll. It was a war that was fought not just for land, but for the very soul of Europe. You are walking with a soldier, a man who has seen more war than you can possibly imagine. He is a soldier in a war that has no end. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is that the Ottomans and the Habsburgs often employed border raiders, a kind of guerrilla warfare where small groups of soldiers would raid enemy territory, burn villages, and kill or enslave the population. This was not a battle. It was a slow, methodical erasure of an entire population. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine tactic or a result of a lack of discipline. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the total is estimated to be in the millions over the course of the conflict. The body count here is a testament to the tragedy of a long, drawn-out conflict. The numbers of the dead aren't a result of a single battle, but of countless small skirmishes, raids, and sieges over centuries. The population of the Balkans and Central Europe dwindled, not just from war, but from the constant fear, the lack of a stable economy, and the accompanying famines and plagues that came with a state of perpetual conflict. It's a quiet, tragic body count, a measure of how a world can die not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing whimper. The great powers, in their patient and pragmatic way, simply outlasted their enemies, and their victory was a demographic one as much as it was a military one. You leave this place, and the sense of weariness hangs in the air like a shroud. You know that this slow, agonizing process is about to have a violent and final conclusion. The long, grinding war between the Ottomans and Habsburgs has faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the salty, humid wind of the East Asian coast. The sounds are not of cannons, but of a new, terrifying kind of body count, the Mongol invasions of Japan. A mainstream historical fact is that in the late 13th century, the Mongol Empire, under Kublai Khan, launched two massive naval invasions of Japan. These invasions, while ultimately unsuccessful, produced a staggering human toll and left a lasting impact on Japanese history. You are standing on a beach, maybe Hakata Bay, and you feel a profound sense of foreboding. The sea is filled with 1,000 ships, a sight that must have been terrifying for the Japanese defenders. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is that the Japanese samurai, who were used to fighting one-on-one duels, were completely unprepared for the Mongols' military tactics, which involved disciplined formations, psychological warfare, and the use of explosive devices. Historians still argue whether the Mongols were defeated by the Japanese military or by a stroke of luck, the two massive typhoons that destroyed their fleets. The result, regardless of the cause, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the total is estimated to be in the tens of thousands. The body count here is a testament to the fact that when two different worlds collide, the results can be even more terrifying than a battlefield. The invasions didn't just kill people, they killed an economy, they killed a way of life, and they killed the very idea of a world that was not perpetually at war. It was a different kind of horror, a testament to the fact that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid when a world that has simply lost its mind. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The typhoon-strewn shores of Japan have faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the hot, humid air of China. The sounds are not of a foreign invasion, but of a different kind of body count, a massive, internal conflict that tore a nation apart and produced a staggering human toll that is almost beyond belief. We are now in the midst of the Taiping Rebellion, a conflict that, from 1850 to 1864, produced a human toll that is often compared to the world wars. A mainstream historical fact is that this was a civil war fought between the Qing dynasty and the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, a theocratic state led by a man named Hong Xiu Quan, who believed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ. You are walking through the countryside, and this is a landscape of profound ruin. The fields are not being farmed, the villages are not just quiet, they are burned out husks. The sounds are not of a single army, but of two massive armies. A civil war that has no end in sight. A quirky tidbit about this war is that Hong Xiu Quan, the leader of the Taiping, believed he had been given a divine mission to overthrow the demon Qing dynasty. His army was not just a military force, it was a religious movement, a terrifying blend of fanaticism and violence. Historians still argue whether the rebellion was a genuine religious movement or a political power grab. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the estimates are staggering, with some historians putting the total at over 20 million people. This wasn't a war fought with swords and cannons, it was a war fought with an insane, brutal efficiency. The body count here is not a result of a single battle, but of a complete and total collapse of society. The war was so brutal and so long that it led to widespread famine and plague, which, in many regions, killed more people than the fighting itself. The population of China, a mainstream fact, was reduced by as much as 30% in some areas. This wasn't a war that was fought in a series of battles. It was a slow, grinding attrition that simply wiped entire populations from the face of the earth. You feel a profound sense of loss, a chilling reminder that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid when a world that has simply lost its mind. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The staggering numbers of the Taiping Rebellion have faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the hot, humid air of Central America. The sounds are not of a civil war, but of a different kind of body count, the rapid, brutal, and utterly devastating collapse of the Aztec Empire. A mainstream historical fact is that in 1521, a small force of Spanish conquistadors, led by Hernán Cortés, conquered the mighty Aztec Empire, an event that led to a catastrophic demographic collapse of the indigenous population. You are standing in the city of Tenochtitlan, a city of immense wealth and power, and you feel a profound sense of awe. This is a city that, at its peak, was larger and more advanced than any city in Europe. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is that Cortés, in his long, drawn-out siege of the city, cut off all the aqueducts and food supplies, starving the city into submission. But his most effective weapon was not a sword or a cannon, but a biological one, smallpox. Historians still argue whether the Aztec Empire was a victim of a superior military force or a tragic, unintended consequence of a biological catastrophe. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the total is estimated to be in the millions. The body count here is a testament to the fact that when two different worlds collide, the results can be even more terrifying than a battlefield. The conquest didn't just kill people, it killed a culture, it killed a way of life, and it killed the very idea of a world that was not perpetually at war. It was a different kind of horror, a testament to the fact that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid when a world that has simply lost its mind. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The silent, ruined city of Tenochtitlan has faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the hot, dusty wind of the Middle East. The sounds are not of a foreign invasion, but of a new, terrifying kind of body count. The Mamluk-Mongol Wars, a long, grinding conflict that produced a staggering, cumulative death toll in a region that had already been ravaged by war. A mainstream historical fact is that in the mid-13th century, the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt and the Mongol Empire, under the command of Hulagu Khan, clashed in a series of decisive battles that would determine the fate of the Middle East. You are standing in the desert, maybe at the site of the Battle of Ain Jalut, and you feel a profound sense of tension. The Mamluks, a group of slave soldiers who had risen to power in Egypt, were a disciplined and highly effective military force. They were the last great hope for the Islamic world against the seemingly unstoppable Mongol hordes. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is that the Mamluks, in a moment of brilliant strategy, feigned a retreat, luring the Mongols into an ambush. It was a classic Mongol tactic used against them, a rare and decisive victory. Historians still argue whether the Mamluks' victory was a result of superior military tactics or a simple stroke of luck. The result, regardless of the cause, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the total is estimated to be in the tens of thousands. The body count here is a testament to the fact that when two different worlds collide, the results can be even more terrifying than a battlefield. The war didn't just kill people, it killed an economy, it killed a way of life, and it killed the very idea of a world that was not perpetually at war. It was a different kind of horror, a testament to the fact that some of the greatest human costs in history are the ones paid when a world that has simply lost its mind. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The dust of the Mamluk-Mongol Wars has settled, and you feel the air change again, becoming the damp, foggy chill of England. But this is not the England of the Civil War. This is the England of a new kind of body count, the anarchy of Stephen and Matilda, a brutal civil war that tore a nation apart and produced a high human toll from a combination of battle, disease, and starvation. A mainstream historical fact is that this conflict, which raged from 1135 to 1153, was a civil war fought for the throne of England between King Stephen and Empress Matilda. It was a war that tore a nation apart and, like so many other conflicts, produced a high body count from a combination of battle and disease and starvation. You stand in a village, and you feel a profound sense of confusion. The soldiers on both sides are English, they speak the same language, they share the same culture, and yet they are trying to kill each other with a brutal efficiency. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is that it was a time of complete lawlessness. The chronicles from the time speak of a land where Christ and his saints were asleep, a testament to the chaos and brutality of the period. Historians still argue whether the war was primarily a result of a power struggle between Stephen and Matilda, or a symptom of a deeply rooted feudal society that was simply too fragile to withstand such a prolonged conflict. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the total is estimated to be in the tens of thousands. The body count here is a testament to the tragedy of a self-inflicted wound. The war was fought not just on a battlefield, but in the towns and villages of England, where families were torn apart by conflicting loyalties. The high body count was not just a result of the fighting, but of the accompanying plagues and famines that came with a state of perpetual conflict. You can almost see the people of England watching their world crumble, their families torn apart by a conflict that seemed to have no end. It's a quiet, tragic body count, a measure of how a nation can bleed itself dry for an idea. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The chaos of the anarchy has faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the familiar, damp chill of England. But this is not the England of a unified king. This is a country in the grip of a new kind of body count, the Barons' Wars, a series of civil conflicts that produced a high human toll from a combination of battle, disease, and starvation. A mainstream historical fact is that the Barons' Wars were a series of civil wars fought between the English monarchy and various groups of rebel barons. The most famous of these was the Second Barons' War, which raged from 1264 to 1267. A conflict that was rooted in the barons' opposition to King Henry III's misrule. You stand on a battlefield, maybe Evesham, and you feel a strange sense of confusion. The soldiers on both sides are English, they speak the same language, they share the same culture, and yet they are trying to kill each other with a brutal efficiency. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is that the rebel leader, Simon de Montfort, was a brilliant military strategist who, at one point, held the king captive. Historians still argue whether de Montfort was a genuine reformer or a power-hungry opportunist. The result, regardless of the motivation, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the total is estimated to be in the tens of thousands. The body count here is a testament to the tragedy of a self-inflicted wound. The war was fought not just on a battlefield, but in the towns and villages of England, where families were torn apart by conflicting loyalties. The high body count was not just a result of the fighting, but of the accompanying plagues and famines that came with a state of perpetual conflict. You can almost see the people of England watching their world crumble, their families torn apart by a conflict that seemed to have no end. It's a quiet, tragic body count, a measure of how a nation can bleed itself dry for an idea. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The quiet tragedies of the Barons' Wars have faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the hot, dusty wind of the Balkans. The sounds are not of a civil war, but of a long, grinding conflict, a new kind of body count, the slow and brutal Ottoman conquests in the Balkans. A mainstream historical fact is that from the 14th to the 16th centuries, the Ottoman Empire slowly and methodically conquered the Balkan Peninsula, a process that was not a single, decisive victory, but a slow, decades-long war of attrition. The body count here is a testament to what happens when an organized, powerful military machine is brought to bear on a disorganized, fragmented people. You are walking with a soldier, a man who has seen more war than you can possibly imagine. He is a soldier in a war that has no end. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is that the Ottomans, in their early stages, were a brilliant and pragmatic people. They were happy to hire Christian mercenaries and even adopted some of the best military technologies from their enemies. This wasn't a religious war in the way the Crusades were. It was a pragmatic, political war for dominance. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans saw themselves as a new caliphate or simply a new empire in the Roman tradition. The result, regardless of their ideology, was a staggering human toll. The body count here is a testament to the tragedy of a long, drawn-out conflict. The numbers of the dead aren't a result of a single battle, but of countless small skirmishes, raids, and sieges over decades. The population of the Balkans dwindled, not just from war, but from the constant fear, the lack of a stable economy, and the accompanying famines and plagues that came with a state of perpetual conflict. You can almost see the people of the Balkans watching their world shrink, a city here, a town there, falling to the ever-encroaching Ottoman tide. It's a quiet, tragic body count, a measure of how a world can die, not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing whimper. The Ottomans, in their patient and pragmatic way, simply outlasted their enemies, and their victory was a demographic one as much as it was a military one. You leave this place, and the sense of weariness hangs in the air like a shroud. You know that this slow and agonizing process is about to have a violent and final conclusion. The slowed, grinding conquest of the Balkans has faded, and you feel the air change again, becoming the damp, salty wind of the Atlantic Ocean. The sounds are not of a land war, but of a different kind of body count, the Spanish Armada, a massive naval battle where the majority of the casualties were not from combat, but from the brutal indifference of the sea. A mainstream historical fact is that in 1588, King Philip II of Spain launched a massive fleet, the Spanish Armada, with the goal of invading England and overthrowing Queen Elizabeth I. The mission was a complete failure, but the body count was catastrophic. You are standing on a ship's deck, and you feel the profound sense of chaos and fear. The battle itself was a series of skirmishes, not a single, decisive moment. The English, with their smaller, more maneuverable ships, were able to outmaneuver the large, cumbersome Spanish galleons. A quirky tidbit about this conflict is that the English, in a brilliant move of psychological warfare, sent fire ships, unmanned vessels filled with flammable materials into the Spanish fleet, causing a panic and forcing the Spanish ships to break their formation. Historians still argue whether the Armada was defeated by the English navy or by a series of devastating storms, which were called the Protestant wind by the English. The result, regardless of the cause, was a catastrophic body count. The numbers of dead are debated, but the total is estimated to be over 15,000, a staggering number for a single naval campaign. The body count here is a testament to the fact that when nature turns against us, the results can be even more terrifying than a battlefield. The Spanish fleet was scattered by storms, and many of the ships, unable to navigate the treacherous waters, were wrecked on the coasts of Ireland and Scotland. The body count here is not a result of a single battle, but of a slow, grinding process of attrition, a measure of how a world can die, not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing whimper. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The winds of the Spanish Armada have settled, and the air has a new, different kind of chill, not the cold of a battlefield, but the intellectual chill of a final tally. You've walked through centuries of history, from the small-scale massacres of early medieval mobs to the continent-spanning horrors of the 30 Years' War and the silent, invisible deaths of the Black Death. You've seen the brutality of Genghis Khan and Tamerlane, the calculated savagery of the Spanish Inquisition, and the tragic self-inflicted wounds of the English Civil War. You've witnessed the slow, agonizing death of empires and the swift, brutal conquest of continents. Now, you stand at the end of this journey, and you are faced with a final question. What is the true body count of medieval history and beyond? A mainstream historical fact is that it is impossible to know. The lack of reliable record-keeping, the wild exaggerations of chroniclers, and the sheer scale of the catastrophes make a precise number a complete impossibility. You feel a profound sense of exhaustion. The numbers you've heard, thousands here, millions there, are just that, numbers. They are abstract concepts that can't possibly convey the human suffering, the grief, the fear, and the profound sense of loss. A quirky tidbit about this is that modern historians, using demographic modeling and archaeological evidence, have tried to come up with more accurate estimates, but even their numbers are still just educated guesses. The truth is, the medieval world was a place where a person's life could be ended in 100 different ways, and very few people were keeping track. Historians still argue whether the numbers are just a convenient fiction to justify a narrative or a genuine attempt to understand the scale of human suffering. The result is that you are left with a profound and unsettling feeling that the true human cost of this era is far, far beyond your comprehension. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. You have seen a world that was perpetually at war, perpetually on the brink of collapse, perpetually bleeding itself dry. You have seen a world where a person's life was cheap, and their death was often unremarked upon. The body count here is not a single number, but an endless, uncountable series of tragedies. You are no longer just an observer, but a witness to a world that was, in many ways, just as brutal as our own, a world that was just as capable of producing a high body count as any modern conflict. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. The silent, final tally has faded, and you feel the air change one last time, becoming soft, still, and calm. The sounds of battle, of mobs, and of plague carts have all receded into the past. You are now standing in a place of quiet reflection, at the very end of our long, dark journey through history. The ground beneath your feet feels solid and safe. The air is cool and clean, and the sky above you is filled with 1,000 stars, a peaceful and silent counterpoint to the chaos and brutality you've just witnessed. Our journey tonight was less about a single number and more about a profound realization that the body count of history is not just a statistic, but a testament to the fragile and often terrifying nature of the human experience. It is a number that, in its unknowable vastness, reminds us of the fragility of peace, the suddenness of catastrophe, and the silent, grinding cruelty that can unfold over centuries. You can almost hear the whispered words of a chronicler, a warning to anyone who would dare to forget. This is what happens when you refuse to surrender. This is the price of your defiance. It was a message that resonated for centuries, and, for our purposes, it was a terrifyingly successful strategy. Remember that a mainstream historical fact is that the true human cost of this era is far, far beyond our comprehension. The lack of reliable record-keeping, the wild exaggerations of chroniclers, and the sheer scale of the catastrophes make a precise number a complete impossibility. The numbers you've heard, thousands here, millions there, are just that, numbers. They are abstract concepts that can't possibly convey the human suffering, the grief, the fear, and the profound sense of loss. You are no longer just an observer, but a witness to a world that was, in many ways, just as brutal as our own. A world that was just as capable of producing a high body count as any modern conflict. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. You have seen a world that was perpetually at war, perpetually on the brink of collapse, perpetually bleeding itself dry. You have seen a world where a person's life was cheap, and their death was often unremarked upon. The body count here is not a single number, but an endless, uncountable series of tragedies. Now, as the stars twinkle overhead, and the soft hum of your fan fills the room, you can let it all go. The numbers, the names, the dates. They don't matter anymore. All that matters is this moment, this quiet stillness. The sounds of history have finally faded, the ghosts of the medieval world, the thunder of hooves, the screams of the dying, the silent, creeping terror of the plague. It has all receded into a quiet, gentle hum. You are now truly at peace, standing in a place of quiet reflection, at the very end of our long, dark journey through history. The ground beneath your feet feels solid and safe. The air is cool and clean, and the sky above you is filled with 1,000 stars, a peaceful and silent counterpoint to the chaos and brutality you've just witnessed. You can let go of it all now. The numbers, the names, the dates, they don't matter anymore. All that matters is this moment, this quiet stillness. You are no longer just an observer, but a witness to a world that was, in many ways, just as brutal as our own. A world that was just as capable of producing a high body count as any modern conflict. You have seen a world where a person's life was cheap, and their death was often unremarked upon. The body count here is not a single number, but an endless, uncountable series of tragedies. It's a sobering thought, a dark kind of irony that a country could bleed itself dry for a crown. You leave this place, and the silence is not a sign of peace, but of a profound and tragic emptiness. Now, as the stars twinkle overhead and the soft hum of your fan fills the room, you can let it all go. The numbers, the names, the dates, they don't matter anymore. All that matters is this moment, this quiet stillness. The weight of all that history, all that suffering, is lifting from you. Like a heavy cloak being pulled away, you can finally rest. The journey is over, and the past is in its place. The world is quiet now. The sounds are just the gentle rhythm of your own breath, the soft beat of your heart, the distant, peaceful hum of the world going on. There's nothing left to fear now. You've seen it all. You've walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and you have survived. There is only peace now, only quiet. The history you've heard is just a story now, a distant whisper on the wind, and it can't hurt you anymore. There is only the here and now, a moment of profound and absolute stillness. Let it all go, sweet dreams. End of script, sweet dreams.